The Second World War came to the doorstep of millions of people around the world, and they were plunged into the heart of the deadliest conflict in history. Many people were displaced and were forced out of their homes, and millions in Europe found themselves imprisoned inside of concentration camps at the hands of the Nazis. There were a number of women who served their countries and nations with distinction, and put their lives constantly on the line for the armed forces in the fight against evil. For example, many women joined Special Operations Executive and were recruited to become spies, risking their lives in the dangerous undercover work. Many female spies were later executed for their involvement, but there was one Filipino-American woman who joined the resistance in the Philippines against the Japanese. On the Philippines, other women such as Nieves Fernandez resisted, as she formed a group of silent killers who took out over 200 Japanese soldiers. But Florence Finch was a woman who was an intelligence officer. However, she took part in resistance to the Japanese occupation in the Philippines, and following this she was subject to horrific torture. Join us today as we look at the female spy who was tortured with electric shocks by the Japanese. And remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Florence Finch was born Loring May Ebersol on the 11th of October 1915 in the Philippines. Her country at the time was under the control of the American insular government, and her father was American and her mother Filipino. At some point she changed her name to Florence Finch. In the evening she would read, but later she attended the Union Church Hall School in Manilla. It's believed that this could have been later the origin of her name change, as the school superintendent referred to her as a blooming flower. From the age of 12 she was financially independent, and she lived at the school and worked part-time to pay for her food, clothes and life. She was regarded as a brilliant student, and she skipped the first 2 grades when she became a high school student, but she did experience some racial taunts as she was considered not equal to full-blood Filipinos, and some students did pick on her. Following high school, she took on secretarial classes, and in 1935 she was able to get a job as an assistant to a business manager. But then before the Japanese invasion of the Philippines, she worked at the G2 intelligence headquarters of the US Army in Manila. Whilst here she met her husband, an American sailor called Charles Smith. He would later be killed in action fighting in the Philippines in 1942. But on the 8th of December 1941, 10 hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Japanese invaded the Philippines. Throughout this period of occupation, as the Japanese forced to surrender, it's believed that around 500,000 Filipinos died at the hands of their enemy. The Japanese would steal many young women from the streets and would force them into horrific slavery, and they were forced to work as comfort women inside of comfort stations for the Japanese soldiers. This was a horrific forgotten war crime, but inside of the Philippines, many Filipino people stayed loyal to the Americans in the United States, and with this they turned their backs on the Japanese and joined resistance groups against the occupiers. But Florence Finch was working as a stenographer inside the headquarters of the US Army in Manila, and at the start of the Japanese occupation, she managed to hide her American heritage and links, and then secured a job at the Philippine Liquid Fuel Distributing Union, which was controlled by the Japanese forces. Whilst working here between June 1942 and October 1944, she managed to link up with the resistance. She would divert fuel supplies meant for the Japanese to the resistance, and she falsified documents for them also, and also took part in acts of sabotage at the fuel site. She had managed to keep fuel supplies from the Japanese, and they helped some American prisoners of war too. She stole fuel vouchers and gave them to someone to sell, then they gave her the money. But whilst working here she constantly feared for her life, and what she was doing was very dangerous, and would have been considered treason if she was discovered. She would have been killed, but she also sent medical and food supplies to a prison camp nearby, and she smuggled the food to the starving American prisoners. However, she was caught doing this, and was then subjected to a horrific ordeal. Florence Finch was interrogated and tortured by the Japanese soldiers, and she was beaten badly. She was forced to stay in a tiny cell of 2 or 4 feet wide in her prison, and she was tortured in many different ways. One way in which she was tortured was that she was subjected to electric shocks, and this was incredibly painful and dangerous. However, Florence refused to give over any information, and she denied to name any people that helped her. But following her torture she was sentenced to 3 years hard labour, and she was almost broken by her treatment. When she was freed by the Americans on the 10th of February 1945, she weighed just under 80 pounds, having almost been worked to death. She managed to escape her execution and had been sent to the Bilibid prison in November 1944, before being sent to a women's prison where things were slightly better for her. The US Army would drive the Japanese from Manila, and with this Florence was freed, but throughout the war she had done a significant amount of work helping the resistance, and also helping people to defy the Japanese occupation. After the conflict she moved to Buffalo, New York, and joined the US Coast Guard. However, she remained in New York until the day she died, and she died on the 8th of December 2016, and she was amazingly given a military funeral with full honours, with the 101-year-old service never being forgotten. After the war she was awarded the American Medal of Freedom, and she also became the first woman to be decorated with the Asiatic Pacific Campaign ribbon. But during World War II she was a woman who bravely risked her life to defy the Japanese, and by stealing fuel from them she did halt some of their advances. She was crafty, but did what she believed she could do to help the Japanese lose the conflict, and she was a woman who was loyal to the Americans. She also saved a number of lives by smuggling food into the concentration camps, and her actions were brave and incredible. But today the story of Florence Finch is not the most well known, but her story definitely deserves to be told. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.